to the FluentReads podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Mark, for having me.
Good to have you. Good to have you. So today we're gonna be having our book chat for today. But first, we're gonna start with an icebreaker activity, the word association game. So basically, I'm going to give you a word, and you're going to say the first word that comes to mind, and then you'll make like the connection and explain it a little bit. Okay? These words are related to books or professional personal development. All right.
All right, let's
Okay.
go.
All right. So the first word is negotiation.
Mm, all right. I would say The Wolf of Wall Street.
Okay.
Uh, it's a movie that I watch a couple times. I find it super motivational,
Okay.
and uh, I mean, I think everybody watched it or knows the story around it. But it's basically like this New York uh, broker that just went crazy and scammed a bunch of people and stole money basically.
Okay. All right. The next word is entrepreneur.
Mission. I
Okay.
believe entrepreneurship can be successful if there's a mission, if there is a why behind it. Um, so yeah, basically, in order to succeed, and we're gonna talk about it also through the today's book. Um, Motivation is needed when you want to complete or reach someone else's goals. And so it's not about money, it's about helping people, about making and leaving a better world after we leave this earth.
Okay. Okay. And the last word, active listening.
Wow, difficult. That's the
Okay.
word that comes to my mind.
Okay.
I find it very difficult to actively listening. Um, Sometimes because the first thing that we do when we hear someone speaking is, okay, I want to reply, and you just wait for your moment to hop in and tell your opinion. Um, but sometimes it's also like you're talking to someone and you zoom out and you're not really aware of what's going on. So for me, very difficult, but it's something that I want to improve constantly, and I'm trying to improve every day.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. So moving on. Tell us why you like reading books like The One Thing in English, which is the book we're going to be discussing today.
So, well, I'm Italian, so that's my mother tongue, and I read books in English mainly because a lot of them are not translated to Italian. Um,
Okay.
but I also believe that translators sometimes are traitors, not
Okay.
purposefully, but translating someone else's words is not always easy, and the meaning can be shifted a little bit around. The reason why I like reading books is because I'm a curious person, and um, yeah, I can't interrupt the book and just tell my opinion. So I have to get the active listening by just continue reading. Um, so yeah, I can't have a dialogue with the book, but it's really good also to think, and it's way better than watching a video, in my opinion, because it stimulates thinking while reading,
Oh,
and you learn a lot of stuff. You can go back, you can stop for a moment, and so yeah, it's a
okay.
pleasant experience also.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about your reading experience in English.
Okay. I don't really know when I started reading in English. Um, I've been usually since a young age pretty good with languages. I got them pretty quickly, but I've not been passionate about it, especially like grammar and stuff. I was not a great student at school for languages, but I was curious to learn new stuff. And so when YouTube started, I started watching YouTube videos, and most of them were in English. So I started learning English actually through YouTube videos. And when I started also getting into a little bit more business, personal development, a lot of books were also just in English. So just started reading. And I believe nonfiction books are awesome to learn also new language, because the what you're talking about is usually pretty technical. And if you're reading, let's say I work in the software industry, if you're reading a book about software um, or technology in English, you probably already know the technical terms, so it's easy. Well, if you read like how do you call romance or whatever, then it's more difficult to understand maybe, because
Okay.
those are words that you don't usually use in a conversational environment.
Okay. Okay. All right. And how do these nonfiction books in English help you for your own personal and professional growth?
I believe it's the content of the book. So it really depends what someone is reading. Uh, so I chose my books wisely. I try to choose something that's interesting, that keeps me continue reading them, and that has some value after the book. So that's about nonfiction books. If I just want to relax and read something that's pleasant, where I don't really and necessarily learn something from, then I just go for fiction books.
Okay. And how do you usually come across these books? Through recommendations, searching online, a little bit of everything?
So a little bit of everything, to be honest. So a few books I got recommended by from other people, colleagues, clients, fellow entrepreneurs, and so on, or friends. A ton of times I get recommendation through YouTube videos, or yeah, usually like if you are into entrepreneurship and you watch some entrepreneurs online, you usually get also a lot of quotes from books. And when I get some good quotes, then I just go ahead and read them. I use also Goodreads to keep track of a few books, and there you get suggestions. So most of the times, you go in, you see an interesting title or an interesting introduction, and you go ahead and add it maybe to the reading list.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go to Amazon and just look for them. What I did also in the past was going to Amazon and look for a specific topic, and getting all of the books above a percentage of like above 4.5 stars,
Okay.
and then just picking them out. So I have a long reading list. Not enough time.
Okay. All right. And do you have a preference? Do you read physical copies, digital books? Have you tried audio books?
I totally love paper.
Okay.
Um, I work with a lot of digital stuff being in technology, but reading for me is physical books. I tried Kindle. I tried to read a bunch of them. What I usually find myself doing is reading them to a certain point, and then you always have some chapters that are not always like the most enthusiastic ones.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I usually stop reading. While with the physical book, also what really helps me is when I go through the book, I see my progress. Like I see,
Okay.
I'm 30% in, I'm 50% in, oh, I'm almost at the end. With the Kindle or ebooks, you don't really see that. So I have read books, but I prefer way more physical ones.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move on and we're gonna get into the book discussion. Okay. So you chose the book, The One Thing: The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
this book, Gabriele.
So the book is actually pretty simple because it hammers on one single concept, one thing. Do
Okay.
one thing, and that's all. all that it's about basically is just about this concept, and it's hammering over for I don't know how many, like 200 and something pages. But I find it fascinating because there are a lot of concepts that are known uh, consciously or unconsciously, a lot of things that you heard of, but it's summarized all in one. And it's almost like scientific, not proof, I would say, but like scientific arguments
Okay.
on why it's important to focus on one thing at a time. So I read it, I think, 3 times, and I like just squeezing everything out of it. And I believe that instead of reading, I don't know, five, six, seven books about business, for instance, or self development, a lot of concepts are condensed in one single book. So it's also, I'm all about optimization. And so it's very productive
Okay.
also to have everything in one single book and going inside one.
Okay. Okay. So it's just you've read it 3 times already. So do you highlight
Yeah.
bookmarks, post-its?
I don't usually use post-its.
All right.
I treat books pretty sacredly. I don't know if that's a
Okay.
word. Uh, so I don't really like writing in them. I recently started highlighting a few things. What I
Okay.
do is put like a small mark um, that's barely visible, but I can go through and I see them immediately because I know where they are, like in the corner, just nicking it a little bit. And just that I know there is something. And usually what I do is if I didn't highlight, I just go and read the page.
Okay. Okay.
But
All
yeah,
right.
I do it in this way.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to your quotes. So you gave us 3 quotes and 3 takeaways. So we're going to start with your first quote, which is, what is the one thing such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary?
Yeah, that's the essence of the book. That's
Okay.
the one question. Um, it's all about what is more important to do now. And sometimes doing one specific thing now will allow us to either simplify our work, either not having to worry about this other thing because maybe it's heavy to do it right now. So we just want to procrastinate and shift it for later. But it's also important to know that sometimes doing one thing can avoid us doing other things. And
Mm-hmm.
one easy example, which is not really talked about in the book, but for instance, if I pay right now my debts, I avoid paying more interest. As simple as that. That could be a
Mm-hmm.
practical example.
Okay. Okay. All right. Um, the next quote. One of the most empowering moments of my life came when I realized that life is a question and how we live it is our answer.
Exactly. This is also um, this is also like connected to the question. So, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Is how we answer it. How we answer this question determines who we are in the future, who we will be, which people we can have an impact on, and what impact we can have on the world. So if I ask myself, what should I do now? This will have a domino effect on everything else. And I really love the concept in the book of these small domino pieces that are aligned one after the other. And physically, one domino piece can, how do you say, like make
I
the
can have
next
a
one
domino
fall.
fall.
That can
Yes.
be
A domino effect. Have
it
a
can make
domino
it
effect.
fall even if it's 1.5 times bigger. So if it's even bigger of the previous one, it still falls. So if you align them in the right way, you have a huge domino effect. And this is exactly what I do now and how I answer the question today of
Okay.
what's the one thing I can do. this will have a long-term impact on everything. What I love, I'm gonna take the book just for a second because there is an
Okay.
amazing um, graph here. I don't know if I'm fast in finding it.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay, so I don't remember exactly where it is. Okay, here. Exactly. Okay, I found it. So one domino can have the domino effect on one that's 50% taller. So we would have at the 18th piece, starting with the first domino that's normal size, normal domino size. At the 18th piece, we would have one that's as big as the Torre di Pisa. The 23rd domino would be as tall as the Tour Eiffel. The 31st domino would be as tall as the Mount Everest, and the 57th is almost the distance to the moon. And
Okay.
this is how we answer the question will have a huge impact. So it's important to align the dominoes in the right place.
Okay. And the right. Okay. Definitely. All right. Very good. Let's move on to the third and last quote that you provided. If your goal is 10, ask the question, how can I reach 20?
Yes, I've seen this very practically in life. If you want to reach something and you ask yourself, how can I do double? Then usually you do way more um, than you would thinking, oh, I have to reach 10 and I do to reach 10. And then maybe, okay, I'm not really reaching it. I'm at 80% is good. But if you put your goal at 20, then you will be way ahead. When you are 80%, you would be already at, how much is it? 18, right? No, sorry, 16. And um, yeah, I really believe in life you can't achieve goals, or very rarely you achieve goals that are bigger than the ones you set for yourself. So always set bigger goals for yourself.
Okay. Okay. Very, very, very good advice there. We're gonna move on to your three takeaways. The first one is create a success list as compared to a to-do list.
Yeah. um yeah, with all the tools that we have nowadays, like, oh, you have to do this and this and this and this, and you just create a to-do list. Instead, what's important is what matters to me, what is important, and prioritize our to-do list. Not everything we put in our to-do list is important. We can have like a backlog, whatever, just to get it out of our minds. Is important to have also sometimes a brain dump. But what's important is to prioritize the to-do list based on our answer to the question, what's the one thing I need to do?
Okay.
And also in the book, we talk a lot about the Pareto principle, which is like the 80-20 rule. So 80% of your result is made by the 20% of your effort or actions. This applies almost to everything in life, but in this case is if you have a to-do list, what's the 20% of the items I put in my to-do list that will allow me to reach 80% of the result, and focus on that 20%. And you keep asking your question till you get to one single thing to do instead of having a bunch of stuff that you want to do.
Okay. That can be extremely useful. Extremely useful. The second takeaway. After you pick your one thing, your number one priority should be protecting the time you use to work with your one thing.
Yeah. So the thing is, once you found what's the one thing you need to do, then the question is, okay, how do I do it? When do I do it? And it's very important to say and to notify everyone look, I'm gonna take 4 hours of my day, or 2 hours or whatever, and I'm gonna sit down and I don't want to be interrupted. Distraction is like a big distraction. So distractions are very bad to what you want to achieve, and can be of different things, can be emails, can be your mom coming into your room if you're still in high school or university. And I've experienced that especially during COVID, where I was the whole day at home. I was working on my stuff, and my mom would just walk in because, I mean, I'm at home, so I'm available for the family. So at that point, I started asking myself, how can I preserve the time to work on my one thing? And the answer a lot of the times is you just wake up in the middle of the night. I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would have uninterrupted time to work on my one thing till like 10 a.m. At 10 a.m., I already finished everything that I had to do.
Yeah. Yes, yes, I can definitely relate to that. There's actually a book on that called the
Yeah,
5 a.m. Club, that talks about that. But aside from that, those are hours that are crucial because typically, everyone's asleep. So you're not going to get any, WhatsApp messages or or anything like that. So it can be
correct.
quite productive. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to
Absolutely.
move on to
About
your,
waking up
sorry.
is not just, I think there's a bit of delay or whatever. Like I was saying that it's not just about waking up in the middle of the night just because everybody does it and you have to, but it's really just to to avoid distraction in every way possible. And if that's the only way, then you should do it. If you can work easily starting your day at 10 and you don't have anyone interrupting you, then we're gonna live a great life anyways.
Okay, okay. All right, let's do your third takeaway. You should reserve 4 hours of non-interrupted time from your day only to work with your one thing.
Yeah. So here again, it's the same concept basically as the second takeaway. Here, 4 hours I've experienced with that, and also when I do like consulting or working on some things, I really believe that you need the time to go into focus, work on the things, have time to think, and half of a day of traditional 8 hour work day, like you need half a day to do something. You can't just jump from one thing to the other and doing hundreds of things in one day. I mean, you could, but it's the same thing as multitasking, even if you're not doing them in the meantime. And the book also talks that multitasking is a lie and it's actually bad and it's not productive at all. Um, and people still think they can do it. But even if you're not putting layers above each other, jumping from one thing to the other, even if you, I don't know, do, oh yeah, this is necessary, I'm gonna reply to this email, or schedule even these small blocks. I tried the Pomodoro technique, which is like 25 minutes of work. Didn't work for me because I need the time to focus on things. And every time you interrupt your work, then you have to go back into that focus. So you can divide, I guess 4 hours is an indication, but you could just test, try out which is the best and ideal working time, and then see where you're productive. When you start to go down, then just stop, and then you have your time slot. For me, a 4 hours were perfectly.
Okay, okay. All right. Very good. We're going to move on to, you talked about some actionable advice in the book. Is there something specific that you have applied in your own life, or other actionable advice that you think could be useful that's offered in the book?
Yeah, so a very important thing that I learned from the book is we should live life not based on the environment, but we should adapt our lifestyle or our day-to-day life to what our goals are. And so one advice that it gives you is, where do you want your life to be in 50 years, 30 years, 10 years, whatever it is? And then you ask yourself, okay, this is my goal for, I want to be here in 10 years. What's the one thing I need to do in order to achieve that? What's the one thing I need to do in the next 5 days? Sorry, 5 years to
Okay.
reach the 10-year mark. Then you ask yourself, what's the one thing that I need to achieve? Sorry, wait, let me rephrase. What's the one thing I need to achieve this year in order to be on track for my 5 year goal? Then you ask yourself again, what's the one thing for this month, for this week, for this day, and then you break it down in smaller and smaller questions that are way more easy to answer. And so this is, for me, was, it's, I mean, the principles inside the books are so simple, for real,
Mm-hmm.
so simple. And sometimes you just have to read it and like, why am I not doing it?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I think this is the
Definitely.
most important thing. And also another quote that I would like to read here is, life is too short to pile up woulda, coulda, shouldas. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Like, we shouldn't live our lives saying, oh yeah, one day I will, one day. Do you have a plan, or are you dreaming? And here the one thing explains how to reach your goals, not how to dream about your goals.
Okay. Okay. I think it's extremely useful, this book, because what you're talking about, those bite-sized actionable tips where let's start for the year. Okay,
Hmm.
let's move it to the month today, this morning, the first hour of my day. And when you reframe
Yeah.
it that way, it it simplifies the process significantly, drastically. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's also very important is that we don't, um, motivation is just a temporary feeling.
Exactly.
I was telling before, motivation is needed to reach someone else's goals. If you have a purpose, then everything else changes. Like, you are waking up and you know, come on, I need to do this task. This is so stupid. I hate it. But then you know, but actually my goal is that one. So this is just a small thing because you already visualize. And for entrepreneurship, it's so crucial because you need to convince other people, to bring them on board, motivate other people, make them believe in your dreams, and dream also big so that you keep going. And you will suffer so much in entrepreneurship,
Yes.
but it's
Yes,
going to be a
indeed.
pleasure anyways, because long-term success is guaranteed if you break everything down to small bites.
Okay. Yes, definitely. Okay. Um, you, who would you recommend this book to and why?
I would say a little bit of everyone. I
Okay.
think it's a
Mandatory
very,
reading.
um, yeah, it's a mandatory reading, especially for entrepreneurs, probably. Um, Even if I think for entrepreneurs, probably are readers, so they heard a lot of concepts. Doesn't matter because this is a handbook that you can just have and you can
Hmm.
read it. It's super easy. It's easy to read and it's one concept, but with different styles of writing and different examples that you say, okay, whatever. Like, I get it, but you have a push more. And so for entrepreneurs, absolutely must read, but also for like normal people. The thing is, entrepreneurship is a cool thing, but not everybody can be an entrepreneur. If you want to be, to have a 9 to 5 job, that is not bad. We need people that want stability, that want to work, that are more hands on, and they should like the job as well, obviously. Um, But some people prefer stability rather than going crazy and risking everything. And that's totally okay. But how do you want to live your life, day to day life? Do you want to go on vacation once a year? Do you want to go eat out every night with your wife? Do you want to have those kids? And I was having a conversation also with my girlfriend about um, how many kids do you want?
Okay.
And the answer was three. And one of the reason, we still have to figure this out, but the thing is, one of the reasons that may be why the number three is because, oh yeah, because otherwise they cost too much. So the answer is, do I want to adopt, like, oh, I just want three kids? For people could be also a big number, but do you want three kids because you don't want to spend more, or do you want to make more so that you can have the number of kids that you really want?
Okay. It's something that's definitely it's an interesting way to frame that. Definitely, definitely. So your recommendation is basically to everyone. It should be sort of a mandatory read because it doesn't matter what point you are, what stage you are in your life. It could be useful. I think you bring up a good point because entrepreneurship, sometimes it can be over glorified in some ways, but it is extremely difficult. And sometimes, I imagine you feel the same. You feel alone, even if you have people around you, because there's so many things that can happen on a day to day basis that the mindset is extremely important. You have to constantly cultivate it day by day, um, in order to get through. So I think this book, the way you're describing it, and the utility that it can have is, it can be kind of like an entrepreneurial Bible in a way, where you're saying, I need some motivation. I need a way to figure this out. Oh, that one thing, and it just takes you back to those basic principles, essentially, to give you what you need to move forward.
Yeah, totally. Like I like, I thought about defining it the Bible, but it's not really a Bible because it's just one single concept.
Uh-huh.
But it's an extremely important basic that you need to master. Otherwise, when everything falls apart, you have water coming through the roof, and they want to throw you out of your apartment, and then some clients are not paying and you need to pay taxes, and then you have problems with the girlfriend, and you have problems with your parents, whatever it is. This can happen like this. In one
Exactly.
day everything comes down, and you need to have a reason why you're doing things. So it's an important basic.
Exactly. This could be, maybe reading for high school students before they even, start studying, which I know there is a lot of pressure, but I think it at least gives you sort of a framework that you can use in almost any situation because there's a significant part of life where we're kind of going through trying to figure it out. What do I want to study? What do I, want to, if you do a 9 to 5 or sometimes in entrepreneurship, you're doing, 12, 14, 16 hours. Um,
Mhm.
where's that energy going? And is it useful? Because at a drop of a dime, this can suddenly change. And you could sit back and question yourself, why was I, you know, dedicating all of my energy toward this when it wasn't really what I wanted?
Yeah, it's also very useful in my opinion when something, like when the disaster comes and you have to rebuild yourself, then
Yes,
you feel just overwhelmed with things. And so the question there is, what can I do as a first step? And I
exactly.
would mix this concept together with another book that I really love, and it's The Next Five Moves by Patrick
Okay.
Bet David. And he makes a lot of comparisons with chess players,
Okay.
and not like grandmasters, they think at least 15 moves ahead, while newbies, they think one or max two moves ahead. And that's totally true, because when you start playing chess, you're focused more on, oh, this thing here does this, and what is, like, you don't really see the moves in advance. And with everything in your life, especially entrepreneurship, you need to align this. And I call this, then I mix them together with one thing and I say, okay, my next moves are exactly my domino pieces.
Okay.
How do I align them? What are the one things subsequently so that I can reach my goals? And then if that's still too broad and too big, then you break it down in smaller chunks again, every single step.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. Um, we're going to move on to the last part, where essentially, what advice would you give someone who already reads nonfiction books in English or they're curious about doing so? This experience about reading it in English and why in English, what has it provided to you, and what advice would you give someone, the community in general?
Okay. Mm, so I believe, as I said already, reading nonfiction books is kind of easier because it allows you to focus more on the content and less on the words, and it's very clear what the message is. Sometimes in like translated books, so let's talk about English books that were originally written in English, obviously. um, it's important also that the message that has been written in a certain way can be understood in a certain way.
Okay.
Interpreters, or sorry, translators do also some interpretation. So they already thought of the meaning of something that has been translated, and it removes your freedom of thinking on your own what the author meant. And this is also, for instance, why is a book better than the movie? Usually it's always like that. If you read a book, a fiction book, and you watch the movie, usually the book is way better, like way better. And the reason why is because when you read it, you can imagine, you see things in your head, and it's a different mind process that allows you to think while you read. While watching a movie, you don't really have the time to think, um, because things happen in front of you. For people that maybe are not comfortable yet reading in English, I would suggest maybe starting with movies, because that's how I started English, learning English. And one advice that really I would recommend everyone learning English is rewatch movies that you already watched in your own language in English without subtitles, or maybe English subtitles. The reason why is that unconsciously you start learning a language, but you already know what's going on. So it's not boring watching a movie that you don't understand. You already know what's going on. So you know the plot, and your mind has time to just process the language. And then talk to people in English, go to public events. And at some point, you can just start with nonfiction books, start a little bit, maybe articles online, and at some point you go through an English book and you don't even realize that you can understand so much English.
Exactly. Wow, that's great. Those are great tips. Yeah, great tips for the community, for people who are not at the level desired yet, or people who are already there. Definitely. We're gonna go on to your. You provided two other books. One you previously mentioned, your next five moves. If you could just
Hmm.
briefly give a summary of the next five moves, why you recommend it, and the third one is the mom test.
Yeah. So the next five moves is really interesting to me because it talks about plans. And oftentimes we, as humans, we reason based on emotions. And this is a lot of times very dangerous for our future life, because we can take a U-turn. Depends on how sensible someone is, but I'm pretty an impulsive person. So sometimes like, oh, you know what? Just change plan. I don't give a shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to use the word.
It's fine.
Um, I don't give a crap about what that person thinks. I don't give a crap about that person. I just change. Oh, you don't want to talk to me? You're not reasonable? Whatever. I'm done. And this is very dangerous because I'm hurting myself too. So to protect my ego, I hurt my future plans. So the next 5 moves, first of all, in the first chapter, it gives you 5 actionable moves, which is understand who you are, what you're doing, and so on. So from the really basics, and then why it's important to have a plan, and why having a plan for the disaster it's important. And me as a technical person, I have disaster recovery guidelines even for myself. When something happens in the middle of the night and the client calls and say, hey, everything's down, I just go through steps without thinking, like steps that I can do without even thinking. So that's the essence of the book.
Okay.
And about the mom test, I read it a long time ago and I would like to reread it again, but I really loved it and I would recommend it to everyone starting or launching a new product or thinking of launching a new product. And it's basic idea validation. Usually, when you pitch a product or you talk about the product or service, whatever it is that you want to sell to someone, very rarely people will tell you, oh, no, it's shit or it sucks. Usually people are people pleaser, and they tend to say, "Oh yeah, it's nice. Maybe I would do this and that." Mm, but at the end, if you are gonna have success, if you have people that are paying for it, not people that say and praise you for what you're doing. So it gives you actionable advice on how to ask the right questions without telling the idea so that you can really get real feedback and real knowledge about what the market needs and what the people that you're talking to um, are thinking of your niche.
Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. We're going to wrap up a bit with our hypothetical question. If you could write a book on any topic, what would it be and why?
Okay. I would love to write a book, but I don't think I'm qualified at all. So
Okay.
it's how to manage a busy life. Sometimes it's very difficult to manage all the crazy things that we have in our head, all the projects, life, friends, and I'm trying to work on that. And once I'm gonna nail it, then probably I'm gonna write a book about it. But I don't feel qualified at all right now because my life is a literal mess because I am a mess managing it. So I don't reply to WhatsApp messages. I forget to reply, forget appointments. So, but there are small things that I start to introduce and I see huge benefits. And so at
Okay.
some point I would love to write a book about these small steps that you can, steps and systems that you can introduce in your daily life.
Okay. Okay. So we will be looking in a near future or a distant future. We'll be looking forward to that book of yours.
I'm looking forward as well.
Okay. To wrap up, do you have any questions for me regarding books or reading books in English, etc.? Anything that comes to mind, feel free to ask as we near the end of
Okay.
the podcast for
I
today.
would love to ask what book would you recommend me after having this conversation?
The book I would recommend for you is, and I've recommended this book already, but it's especially for the the War of Art. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. It's not The
So,
Art of War, that's another book. It's The War of Art. So basically,
okay.
sometimes, as we were talking about the one thing, sometimes we need language to define simple concepts. And once we have those concepts defined,
Hmm.
we're able to understand them with more clarity. So Stephen Pressfield in the book, the world of art, he talks about this force that prevents us from doing things. Now, this force can sometimes people talk about procrastination, lack of motivation, but he refers to it as resistance. And he says this resistance is essential, and the bigger it is, the more perhaps you need to take on this endeavor that you want to do. So it can be from maybe you want to write, maybe you want to create an app, maybe you want to start a dance class or something like this. So it's basically, this is something, although it has art in the title, it's not only for artists, but I think it's great for anyone because we all experience resistance in all aspects of our life, because there's something, and that's why I said sometimes we refer to it as lack of motivation, procrastination, but I think the fact that he defined it as resistance was an interesting way of solidifying something that we all experience. And then it also gives you some also key other insights in overcoming it and essentially going from amateur to pro. And it's basically, that's in a nutshell, more or less, that's the book. He recognizes the resistance. He defines it as that, and then he talks about the journey from amateur, which is essentially a beginner, to essentially turning pro, and doing what you need to do, and incorporating consistency, discipline, etc. So based on our conversation and based on this book, The One Thing, that's the first recommendation that comes to mind.
Sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Sounds really good. I'm gonna
Okay.
absolutely read it, buy it first, and then read it because I want to have a real
Okay.
physical copy.
The physical copy. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. Thank you very, very, very much for today, Gabriele, for
You,
during the
you.
FluentReads podcast. You provided a lot of useful details, key quotes, and insights that I think could be useful for anyone in all walks of life. So thank you for your time and providing this utility for the Fluent Reads community.
Thanks a lot, Mark, for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor to be on here.